Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come and see our session on developing data literacy. My name's Zara Wells, and I am a CSM for our enterprise customers based in our London office, just in case my accent didn't give it away. I've been with Looker for just shy of 3 years, and I've been working with customers a little over 7 years. And in that time, I've really seen that change management is a huge issue, that it's not something we learn at school. So I certified as a change management practitioner a couple of years ago, and I've been focusing on that with a lot of our enterprise customers, helping that process be a little bit easier.
And my name's Maire Newton. I have been with Looker for a little over 3 years, and I actually started out on our professional services team. So I spent 2 years working with customers, actually on projects and implementations. I think in that time have worked with over 60 different customers on those types of projects. And now I'm actually a member of our customer experience marketing team. So I lead a lot of our scalable engagement and adoption programs globally. In today's talk on developing data literacy, Zara and I are going to start by talking about what we mean when we say data literacy and why it's so important to develop in the first place. And then we'll dive into 3 keys to success that we've found from our work with customers. The first is that for any sweeping change, it's really important to focus on the individuals, because sweeping change requires individual change. The second is that you need to cultivate an environment where data can be a conversation starter, where it becomes part of people's day-to-day work life. And then the third is to develop a community around data. And then we'll wrap up with any remaining time for questions. So let's start by talking about what data literacy is, and really why it's so important to develop in the first place. As Sir Winston Churchill once said, Zara's familiar, the empires of the future are the empires of the mind. We are in the future right now, and he was very right in that statement. In our economy today, growth and innovation is dependent on our ability to leverage data and turn it into knowledge. The world we live in is very different than it was even 10 years ago. It's harder to differentiate on products alone. Consumers demand better customer support, better customer experience. And at the same time, to stay ahead of the competition, you have to be more efficient than ever. And data is a way of doing that. There are companies that are completely changing business models. Companies like Blue Apron and Home Chef have started an entire market around meal kit delivery. That didn't exist 10 years ago. We have companies like Casper that are revolutionizing the mattress industry. Doctor on Demand changing the way we access medical care. Etsy creating an entire marketplace to connect consumers with artisans. All of these business models are changing. And in order to participate in that environment, data has become the currency for moving forward. When I was growing up, the only things delivered to my house were things that maybe my parents had ordered from a catalog, if you can remember those, or perhaps a pizza that we had ordered from our landline telephone. And now, I can have just about anything delivered to my doorstep in 2 days. It's completely different than it was 10 years ago. And data is the reason why. But just having data, that's not enough. It's the ability to take the data that you have and convert that into knowledge. And then take that knowledge and use it to drive action, and then find ways of making that action repeatable and scalable. That's what's going to drive growth and innovation. Developing data literacy is what enables everyone in your organization to participate in that journey. But let's take a step back and define what we mean when we say data literacy. There are a lot of different definitions out there. I actually did a Google search on data literacy, and in the first page of results, I found 16 different definitions. So being a Looker employee, I of course turned to Looker. I broke down all of those definitions, and I created this word cloud to see where there were trends and patterns in the words that were popping up. And from here, there were 4 words that really jumped out to me. Those 4 words were read, understand, use, and communicate. So my definition for data literacy is the ability to read, understand, and communicate through the use of data. What I like about this definition is that if you change the word data at the end of it and replace that with language, you actually end up with a definition that can apply to broader literacy overall. So the ability to read, understand, and communicate through language. And in many ways, data literacy is about learning a new language, the language of data. How many of you in the audience have ever tried to learn or have learned a foreign language in your life? Yeah, most of you? Me too. I recently started trying to learn French through the app Duolingo. Anyone heard of that? It's pretty popular. And it's a great app. They have a set of exercises that you can do to build your vocabulary and learn how to understand other languages, which is fantastic. But what I've found is that 300 plus days in to trying to learn French, it's going okay, but if you dropped me in Paris tomorrow, not only would I struggle to truly converse with somebody, I would probably be terrified to try because it's really hard. And I'd be really self-conscious about how I sound and the words that I'm using. Because language is more than just a sum of skills. It's more than just checking the box on vocabulary and grammar. And data literacy is the same way. It is more than just a sum of skills. Knowing the difference between correlation and causation, that doesn't mean that you can go recognize that when you see it in the wild and be able to apply that. It's more than just a sum of skills. And I know here at a data conference with several like-minded individuals, it can be easy to forget how hard it is for someone who maybe isn't familiar with data, doesn't have a great starting point, and how self-conscious they might feel trying to start speaking that language. So keep that in mind as Zara starts to dive into those 3 key strategies that I mentioned at the beginning.
Thank you. So building data literacy in your company is challenging, but it is vital. And we were thinking sort of 5 years ago, this would have been an impossible thing to do. But everyone is hungry for information. So we're hoping that the people that you're hiring, the people that you're working with, are ready to kind of come on this journey with you. And from working with our customers, we kind of came to the agreement that there are a few keys to success. So starting with the democratization of data, understanding what data sources the different departments are using, why they're using it, what they're using it for, if that ties to their KPIs, getting that all in one place and having your single source of truth, and applying governance to that as well. So again, we're wanting to make this a safe place that people aren't going to make mistakes with that data, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. Encouraging stakeholders to have those conversations and working with one another. So coming up with those measures, those dimensions that they're all going to agree on. So focusing on the individual, we're really going to kind of hammer this home that change is about the person, it's about the people. And so we're focusing on the individuals. You want to meet them where they are today rather than throwing kind of all this content at them and having them figure it out and finding a way to get to where you want them to be. So we'll talk about making sure the content is relevant for them and relevant for where they are in their development. And starting conversations with data. It's not about finishing a conversation or using it as ammunition. So we want to encourage you to share best practices around the start of a conversation, but cultivating an environment where people really value people using data in conversations, cultivating an understanding of decision making. And then a data community. That's the most important thing and one of my favorite things to work on. So making it easy for people to work with one another. That doesn't mean that they have to coordinate on colors, which honestly wasn't planned. But it's about ensuring people feel a part of a community and sharing a culture of using data and having that be the vehicle to making decisions. So like we've said, data literacy, it's an individual journey. A lot of people, they kind of think if we just get the people that are already pretty data literate, they're in the data team, and push them further up that chain, then it's great. Everyone else can figure it out. We'll have them supply the reports, the dashboards that they need to use, and we'll tell them what to do. And they forget the people, the end users as we refer to them, people like myself, that don't know really what data is. We may think of it as information or like the weather report, something that we look at, but we don't see it as that was data that I took in, I understood, and I used it to make a decision. So making sure that you're being kind of contextual for where people are. You see so many kind of certifications and courses. So, you have these people that are like, I kind of did it with my change management qualification. I'm still terrible at change. But you don't want people to come in and be like, I nailed it. I got 100% on my data literacy course, and now I'm data literate. It's really not the case. We see data literacy and having that data-driven culture as something that changes over time and it evolves over time, and it's a journey that you're going to take those individuals on to kind of come towards this data culture that everyone's talking about at the moment. So it's all personal, and interestingly enough, sometimes I think we forget that people are humans and people in different teams. The front row heard us explaining to ourselves that all of you are humans. There's nothing to be nervous about, and there's no need to kind of worry about it. But when you're engaging with these end users, yes, they have very different backgrounds to some of you, and they have different anxieties, they have a different pace of learning. Really take that into consideration. It can be very kind of anxiety-inducing to throw something at someone, expect them to know it, and it then kind of puts a block, and then you have to start from square one and unbreak all of that, unwind all of that, and start again. We figured that, that point that we said about companies focusing on the people that are already kind of data savvy, and that's where the focus goes. And we were kind of having a conversation and saying how we've seen it in so many kind of enterprise organizations where you have thousands of people and you get kind of 400, 500 people really ramped up and really engaged in Looker. But really what you're doing is creating a gap between those end users and then your analysts. And again, that's not a community. You want to share the same values, you want to share the same beliefs, and by doing that, you'll then have everyone communicating and understanding kind of what that context is. So Maire, being the analytical one, decided to, again, use Looker to try and depict this and see, actually, are we right? Is it worth investing in every individual rather than just a group of people? So I'll pass over to Maire to explain her findings.
Yes, so as Zara said, I decided to test this with some numbers. So I created basically 100 end users, as you would say, and aligned each of them with a starting data literacy level. So imagine we sent out a survey and asked people where they were now. And so I used a randomization function to do this, and I assigned them a value between 1 and 10. To test out our hypothesis, which was that it's better to focus on moving everybody up in their data literacy a little bit versus just a few people by a larger amount, I started by taking all of those individuals and increasing their data literacy level by 1 point. And what happened was that over our entire company, the average data literacy level shifted from 5.4 up, as expected, 1 point to 6.4. Now I did the same thing where I took only those who were above average, so above 5.4, 6 and higher, and I imagined that I implemented a program that maybe targeted those who were already comfortable with data, so those above average folks, and I increased their data literacy score by 2 points, but then I left everyone else the same. And what we saw with that is that the new average was 6.2, so it still went up as expected. It's a little bit lower than when we focused on everybody. But if I shifted from looking at the average and I instead took the median to get a sense of the general population there, the median stayed the same because over half of my employee base was actually below average to begin with. So what this showed is that not only was the growth just slightly lower and the potential slightly lower, but it absolutely created those two different groups that Zara was talking about, where you have those at the top who could at some point become a bottleneck with data initiatives because they're the only ones that can really understand and engage. And then you have the people on the lower end of the scale who are even struggling to participate in the data initiatives that are going on. And that can be really frustrating for a lot of individuals.
So some of you may have seen this before. It's we call it the change curve. And yes, it is very reminiscent of the 7 stages of grief. And that's not what we're trying to achieve here. But what you see is this kind of general journey that individuals go on. Now, this is irrelevant to skill set. It's irrelevant to experience. It's something that everyone goes on. So the point of showing you this is be empathetic to your end users. And again, that can be C-level, but it can be someone, that's kind of fresh out of university and just starting. Just be cognizant that everyone has different experiences. Please also bear in mind that this isn't a diagnosis. I've heard customers say, I think they're in the denial phase. So we've just said, don't worry, you're in denial, but we're going to get you through to frustration. You're going to be fine. Don't do that. No one needs to know that. What is good for you to know is that there are different levers that you can pull when people are in the different phases. And again, a lot of people think of this as a linear progression, and it's unfortunately not. So some people will oscillate between the two kind of different phases. So making sure that you have materials for each kind of phase that people go through, and like I say, using those different levers to help people on that journey. So the first phase, denial, is about creating alignment. And I think that sometimes that's a missed opportunity. We just kind of say there's this brilliant tool, you're going to love it. But it really should be a case of we are trying to become, or we will be, a data literate organization, which means we want to upskill you and make you data literate individuals. The way we are doing this is by implementing this tool, this system, these trainings. We know that you have lives, we know that you have jobs, and this is going to be baked in, a management note, all that kind of thing. So really communicating what is happening, why it's happening, and measuring what the response is. And then you get the frustration phase. Now that can manifest itself in things like gossip and people not sure of who to go to and going to the wrong people. So again, really tightening up on your communication plan. We always recommend that, the easiest thing is to just get kind of the big boss to send out an email and be like, this is great, you're all doing fine. But that's a one-way communication. We want to keep it like an open feedback loop. Slack channels are really good. Having town hall meetings, things like that, where C-level will show or demonstrate a visualization or a report. Again, it's not just this is the report, read it, do it. It's this is the report that we've come up with. Why we feel this is important is because of this. Does anyone have any questions? Does anyone have any different thoughts? That kind of thing. So again, it's having a conversation. The depression phase, it's really about sparking motivation, and you have to be really careful here. So a lot of people will try and add incentives, but just be careful of how that manifests itself. A typical example is if you tell a sales rep to sell more, then they may go flipping tables and doing whatever they need to do to kind of meet those targets. So do try and think of the end product that you're going to create. But having things like, pioneering departments that really have shown an impact of using this kind of data literate kind of culture that we're trying to do, or they've done a hackathon, or they've done an activity and this was the findings they were able to do. It doesn't have to be super relevant to other departments, it just has to be understood. And then the experimentation phase, and actually sometimes people can be put off. So if you have a tool that allows you to see usage, you may see that usage drops, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that people are thinking about really how they're going to use this in their workflow. So to Maire's point, if you're already helping them by bringing in these kind of reports, dashboards into the systems they're already using, that's a great way of helping them through this phase already and helping them kind of see that there's not a ton you have to do, it's just something you have to get used to reading and understanding, and again, having that communication. And then the decision phase. This is where people they've got it down, they realize we're on the way up of the change curve, this is something I know I can use, and encourage them to share their experience and coach new members of the team, other members of the team, having knowledge sharing sessions, and communicating that as well. So like we've said, data should really be a conversation starter. I think we've all been in conversations where people have tried to shut you down with data. I do it to my husband all the time. But that's really not a best practice that we want to promote. It really is about making sure that we're inspiring conversations. We want people to engage in these conversations. It's not just between two people. And it's also really important to recognize that data can be deceiving. And to end users, we're not always entirely sure of how bad data can be and how wrong data can be. And I'll show you an example of where that can get you into some really sticky situations. But first of all, who can tell me, Maire knows the answer to this, who can tell me the percentage of statistics that are made up on the spot? Great answer, you're right, you're right. Anyone else? You're right, brilliant, we're all right. 73.6% of statistics are made up on the spot, you were the closest. So, I mean, yeah, it's kind of a joke. And again, a perfect example of how I engage with my husband when I try and make a point. But we don't want to allow end users to be in this situation. We don't want them to fall into that trap of having an answer to something, they're really confident in it and they use it, and then it's backhanded away as, well, where did you find this? And sometimes it can just be that they were looking for something and then they found it, so they stuck with it. But this also comes back to making sure that the data people are reading, it's in context. When data is taken out of context or it's not explained, it can be incredibly misleading, and it can change the fate of a nation. Who's heard of Brexit? Okay. I'm sorry for anyone else from the UK. I realize we're all still in that depression phase, and also denial and every phase. But honestly, it's devastating. So we don't want people to hurt themselves with data. The person who decided to plaster this across the bus is probably not the person that's being thrown under the bus. It's the person that's delivered that message. And it's the person that's saying, well, this is data. That's kind of just how it is. And again, this is an example of where someone has just tried to shut a conversation down and they've not added the context. And now we're in the situation we're in still. So what we're saying here is that your analysts are the people that know how to make this data clean. They know how to sanitize it. And I'm terrible with analogies, and my clients will know this, but the closest thing that I could think of was babies and toddlers. I'm not saying that politicians are babies and toddlers, but when you have them in a play area, you sanitize it, you make it safe, you make sure there are no sharp edges, you don't want them to hurt themselves, you set them up for success. That's the same thing with your data. Get it ready, keep iterating on it, and make sure it's usable and people can communicate with it so they can't hurt themselves with it. Once people feel like the data isn't trustworthy or they don't feel like they can do that again, it's really difficult to bring them back through, and you're going to throw them straight back to that denial phase. So best practices are really important, making sure that it's in context.
So how do you go about making data usable? as Zara said, and enabling people to bring it into their day-to-day conversations. There's two key things, and the first is accessibility. And I don't mean making data available, because I've seen so many times that people take data from their database, they expose it in some sort of reporting tool like Looker, and they hand it off to their users and say, here, have fun, it's everything you could possibly need. That's really hard for an end user. Zara could tell you. I think we've probably done that to her a few times. So accessibility is about the way that you make data available. It's about thinking through how people are going to navigate it, find what they're looking for, and then start to understand what it all means. And then the second piece is that context that Zara talked about. How many of you have ever been, I don't know, in the supermarket or walking down the street and you see someone and you recognize them, and it's someone you know, and it takes you a minute to figure out exactly who it is? Has anyone had that experience? I see a lot of nodding heads, most of us. It's hard because we're seeing that person out of context. Data is the same way. Context is about bringing data into the storylines that people already understand, because when they see data in the context of the business process or outcome that it's meant to impact, it's going to make it so much easier for them to connect those dots. So let's get specific. What are some things, some tactics that you can use in order to make your data accessible and contextual? When it comes to making data accessible, first, it's about bringing your business terminology into the data so that it's not just database terminology. If I'm an end user searching for the key performance indicator that I'm interested in, when I search for that, any of the data, the reports, the dashboards, they're going to pop up and match the way that I search for it so that I can find it really easily. It's also about creating that sandbox, not overwhelming people with too much right out of the gate. You want to keep that safe environment where people can not just understand what they're seeing, but really start to build confidence. Because like we talked about earlier, especially for those who maybe aren't as comfortable with data in the first place, you want them to start to build up their confidence and their understanding of what's there. And then the final piece, and arguably the hardest piece, is to build really good content, reports, dashboards that are really easy to understand and clear, because that's going to be the entry point for almost everybody. That's the first thing they're going to see, and in some cases, that's going to be the thing they see that makes them decide whether they're going to keep looking or not. And it's really hard because it requires that you not only start to get an understanding of what charts to use when and what colors to use and how to display things, but it also means that you need to talk to the people that are going to be using that data and understand what their questions are, what metrics need to be there. And that's how you'll be successful in really making that data not just available, but accessible to as many people as possible. When it comes to context, again, this is about integrating data into storylines, integrating it into things that people are already familiar with and comfortable with. So this could be something as simple as having a data dictionary or something that people can reference to understand what all the terms mean. Or it could be sending data out so that it hits people's inbox at a pertinent time. Maybe even setting alerts so that people are instantly alerted when something changes that might impact them in some way or require that a decision be made. Or even going a step further than that and starting to integrate that data into the tools and processes where people are already living at work. So maybe it's bringing data into Salesforce so that your sales team can see data right within the account pages and opportunity pages that they're already living in their day-to-day job. Or maybe it's integrating ticketing data into Zendesk so that your support team is seeing all of that information and their customer satisfaction scores right within the context of the tool that they use all the time. that's when you start to really build out an environment where people can not only understand data, but they can start to share it, and then they can start to talk about it. So the final strategy that we'll talk about today is cultivating a community around data. And this is really important because if you're focused on individual engagement and then building out a culture around data that's putting data in front of people, making it unavoidable, cultivating a community from there is how you're able to leverage those things and harness them to really drive growth and change. So what a community does is it creates a space for people to come together and learn from each other. They can share best practices, solve problems. Two heads are better than one. So this is where people are able to ensure that they're not reinventing the wheel. They're able to see what other departments are doing. They're able to see what other challenges people are solving. You can spotlight people that are doing amazing things this way. And you can create an environment where people can figure out together what the next problem is that they want to tackle. And they can start to innovate from there. This is really, really powerful. But when you go about building a community, there are some considerations to keep in mind. This is not a silver bullet. There's not one thing that's going to work everywhere. And so the first consideration is really the technical level and roles of the people who are involved in the community. Because you may have people who are developing models and they really want to talk about modeling best practices and analytical patterns. And on the other hand, you might have some folks who develop content or even just view content who won't be interested in those conversations, but may want to talk about visual best practices or color theory. And so the important thing is to create a community that fosters all of those conversations and creates a place for all of those people to get together and have those conversations and participate in whatever way makes sense for them. The second consideration is the engagement level. How much time and energy are different people going to be willing to put in to being part of this community? And that's going to change over time. This is an evolution. So at the very beginning of your journey, when people are in that denial phase, they may not be willing to spend a ton of time participating in a community or coming to events, talking to other people. But hopefully, as you evolve, that will change, and your community can evolve with it. You also may simply, by having people all over the world or a lot of people who work remotely, run into a situation where a virtual community makes a lot more sense than something in person. But if you have a lot of people who are co-located, then an in-person community is a great way to go. So these are just considerations for how you might select the types of events and the ways that you might engage people in a community. Now, we do have some things that we've done at Looker and that we've seen be successful, and Zara has done a lot from a community perspective, so I'll actually hand it over to her to talk you through some of the things that we've seen with our customers.
So we're obviously all at Join. This is a perfect example of a community event and something that we're doing to kind of help everyone on that data literate journey. But also what's really interesting is obviously what the marketing team have done is they've put different tracks on for different kind of levels of technicalities, skill sets, but also engagement. So for example, there was a kind of 8-hour hackathon yesterday. That's really perfect for those people that are super engaged, but also super technical. Trying to get end users to go to an 8-hour hackathon to talk about data and kind of LookML and all that kind of stuff is the quickest way to put them off. So making sure, again, with that kind of context that we've spoken about, making sure that the sessions that you're putting on for them are relevant to them, relevant to their engagement level, their technical level. So some examples of things that we really encourage is training resources. Obviously, Looker provides all of that for you. But is it in context for your business and for your use cases and your end users' use cases? Probably not. So for those that don't want to sit in a room with you for an hour, 2 hours a week, provide resources to them that are contextualized for their use case and for their company that they can use. You'll see those sort of things being used a lot in that kind of developing capability phase, and also the frustration phase. People will mindlessly click through things. They don't want to talk to anyone. They're just trying to figure things out. So that's great to have. And again, it can be accessed at any time. So with that oscillation, you can just kind of promote some of that content when you feel people are moving back through. Things like user groups. So we're aware that not everyone kind of works and sits in the same office, but again, we're wanting to kind of really foster that community and that culture. So doing things like having pizza in the office and telling the person at home, like, get pizza or send them pizza if you're that generous and have that good of a budget. So keeping them involved, and again, it's the really small things. You will be surprised that adults really take to kind of this lunch, kitchen table kind of value that we have at Looker. Like, you will sit around, you will talk about the same thing, and you have food. Everyone loves free food. Show and tells. So again, what I sort of mentioned earlier, we want to keep things in context, but it's also really interesting to see how other departments are using data. So do try and do kind of cross-departmental collaboration sessions where you can kind of talk about the things that you've achieved and helping people understand what the possibilities are. And then, of course, you've got things like the ambassador program, so really getting people pumped up, people that aren't necessarily, a bit like me, didn't have a background in data, but really keen to kind of move things along and kind of meet company missions, all that kind of thing. So having something in place for them that they can then join into. You actually have a client that, to kind of help with this, everyone loves swag. In the UK, people go nuts for it. So we created little badges that they could wear on their security lanyards, which said they were kind of a Looker specialist or something like that. It's really small, but it just means that people will approach them if they're in the lift or whatever and just kind of say, oh, you work with this? Like, is it all right if I come and sit with you? And it just kind of gives them a sense of belonging and being a part of that journey as well. But it also just helps, it helps with adoption too, right? So data literacy, it is a cultural change. So like we said, data literacy, people are data literate. Companies and organizations will have a data culture, but we don't believe that you can have one without the other. So it will start with a handful of people in the organization, and typically, yes, it does start with the data analysts. But if you can get some of those kind of more analytically minded individuals in different departments to kind of create that weight, you will get the critical mass following if you really nail your communication plans and really being cognizant and empathetic to where people are in that journey. I don't know if it's still the case here, but we had lots of startups in the UK and everyone wanted a mission statement. And everyone's mission statement had transparency in it. Is that still a thing over here? Okay. No one's ever considered baking in data literacy or having a data culture into their mission statement. Like, why can't we add that into our mission statements as a company, and then, you have microclimates within a culture, so having your separate departmental mission statements. We want to be driven by data. Our actions are driven by data. Just including that in gives the sense to your current employees that this is the direction we're moving in. But it also lets people that are joining the company know that that's where you're going as an organization, and they can come on that journey as well. It is beneficial to an individual to be more data literate. It's not just a company kind of mission, it's an individual mission too. So, closing up a little bit, we've covered that it's really important to have that democratization of data, the importance of making it clean, the importance of making sure that people can't kind of hurt themselves by using data and kind of then never want to use it again. We then have spoken about focusing on the individual, and that also comes with best practices and making sure that that filters down and making sure that everyone knows that you appreciate that they may not have the skill set that they need to have to be able to do causation analysis, and that was a good word, right? All that kind of stuff that analysts do. But yeah, like I say, making sure that they understand that you're aware of that and not expecting them to learn these things outside of work. You will not get someone like me to go, okay, it's different for me because it's my job, but for someone else to go home and study kind of data analysis and the right visualization tools to use. So take it to the individual. If it's something like trying to demonstrate why a pie chart isn't as effective as a bar chart, things like that, use it with data that makes sense to them. starting conversations with data. It really isn't something that you should be using as ammunition. It should be a conversation. You want to encourage people to think and talk critically about data. And it doesn't have to be kind of littered with all these terms and buzzwords like, AI and predictive analytics, all this kind of stuff. That means nothing to an end user. And it doesn't help to kind of alienate people. So like we said, the people at the level where they do use data, but they may not realize they use data. You'll have different learnings, different lessons, different materials for them than you will do your analysts and kind of people that are analytically minded. And then, of course, the cultivating a data community. Communities are made up of kind of like-minded people. They have the same belief systems, but it's also a place that people can feel safe in. So we really want to ensure that we're recognizing that. Again, a terrible analogy, but you wouldn't leave scissors in a kid's sandpit, right? So don't do the same with your data. Make sure people can't hurt themselves in a way that will make them not want to use data, and there'll be that kind of thorn in your side because it's so difficult to then move people on from there.